He stood alone at the start line, like a man preparing for battle. Not a family event, not a couple's milestone. No, this was his stage. He was stretching like he was about to run a marathon, breathing like he was chasing a gold medal, not jogging alongside the woman who so clearly needed a partner, not a competitor. And the moment that gun went off, he took off like a man escaping something. Maybe himself. Maybe his responsibilities. Definitely his wife. This was supposed to be Janelle's moment, her first 5K, a personal goal she had set for herself, filled with nerves, doubt, hope. After everything she'd endured lately, the distance, the tension, the increasingly cold silences in their marriage, this wasn't just a race. It was a test of something deeper. She hoped he'd show up beside her, not ahead of her. And yet, what he did next said everything without a single word. He ran off without her. And I don't mean a casual stride or even a gentle nudge forward. He left like the race was his, like her presence didn't even matter, like she was invisible in a moment she had invited him into. She looked around, shaky, unsure. You could see it in her posture, the way her shoulders pulled in, the small smile she gave to no one in particular. She didn't need a coach. She didn't need a cheerleader. She needed a partner, one who would walk beside her at her pace, no matter how slow or fast she moved. She needed support. And once again, what she got was abandonment, dressed up as self-improvement. This wasn't just selfish, this was symbolic. Because for viewers who've been watching from the start, who've seen episode after episode of Kody dominating the narrative and acting like anyone else's needs are an inconvenience, this was the physical manifestation of what emotional neglect looks like when it can't hide behind a smokescreen. He wasn't there for her, not emotionally, not physically, not even optically. Worse, the cameras caught it all, the way he barely glanced back, the way he ran with clarity and conviction, zero hesitation, as if he needed to win something, even though no one was keeping time except him. It wasn't a race for him, it was a spotlight, and he stood in the center of it, while Janelle was left somewhere behind it, trying to keep herself together with whatever pride she could still salvage in front of the crew. It's heartbreaking, because Janelle isn't the type to ask for much. We've watched her over the seasons being steady, rational, fiercely independent, often the one who bends, who adjusts, who holds on longer than she probably should. And maybe that's why this hit so hard. Because even someone like her, who doesn't ask for flowers or calls or drama-filled declarations, still wants her husband to jog beside her. But Sean did, and let's not underestimate that. When Kody bolted like he had something to prove, it was Sean, unexpectedly, who saw her, who walked beside her, who noticed she was alone. That tells you everything you need to know about who's paying attention in that family, and who's not. What gets me the most is how oblivious Kody seemed afterward. Or worse, not oblivious, detached, like he didn't even consider his absence a betrayal. The way he smiled and joked after, proud of his finishing time, showing off like he'd just conquered something major. He didn't check in with her. He didn't walk back and say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't even ask how she felt. He left. He finished. He posed. And then he moved on. This is where the audience began to shift, because up until this moment, you could kind of pretend there was still room to forgive the disconnect, to hope maybe things were salvageable. But this 5K? It became something else. A metaphor so loud it shattered the illusion. A literal race that revealed the actual distance between them. The emotional space. The chasm he helped dig with every missed moment where she needed him and he chose himself instead. And this isn't about fitness. It's about priorities. It's about whether you see your partner struggling and slow down long enough to walk with them, or whether you need to be seen in your own greatness so badly you're willing to leave them behind. She didn't say much that day, not on camera, but the silence was louder than any fight. Her eyes scanned the finish line with no excitement in them. Her smile was tired. Her body language said it all. And Kody? He kept talking like he'd done something impressive, like what he had achieved deserved praise. It wasn't a race. It was a relationship test, and he failed. What came next would only make it clearer. Because this wasn't an isolated moment. It was a preview of every decision he was going to make from this point forward. Every wife was going to feel what Janelle felt in that run. Left behind, unheard, unseen. And Janelle, that day, became the first one the cameras caught physically experiencing it. But she wouldn't be the last. There was something in her voice that morning. Something soft, cracked, careful. Not uncertainty exactly, but maybe unease. Janelle has never needed anyone to hold her hand, not really. She's always been the one who figures things out, manages the budget, raises the kids, and shoulders the mess without asking for help. But this day, this run, it wasn't about stamina. It was about support, and for once, you could tell, part of her wanted to be taken care of. Just a little. Just enough. She looked nervous when she arrived. That awkward, hesitant sort of energy that comes from someone trying not to show how exposed they feel. She smiled through it. Of course she did, because that's how she survived for years, pushing quiet vulnerability beneath the surface and moving forward anyway. And you could tell she wasn't expecting grand gestures from Kody. But she expected something. A presence. A gesture of loyalty. Someone who'd say, "I'm right here, every step." It's what anyone would want, especially after the distance that had grown between them. The cold shoulders, the blame shifting, the way everything she said lately seemed to get twisted into a reason why she was the problem. Janelle didn't run this race to prove she was fit. She ran it to feel like herself again, to feel brave, seen, strong. But he didn't see that. Or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it like he's ignored so many of her quiet needs before. Instead, he got ready for the race like it was a solo sport, stretching, bouncing, eyes focused ahead. He didn't turn to ask how she was feeling, didn't check if she needed anything. She could have been anyone to him on that track. A random participant. Not the woman who once helped raise his entire family. Not the woman who chose to build her life around togetherness and now stood alone in the middle of it. And when that whistle blew, he didn't hesitate. He didn't check to see if she was ready. He didn't pause to say, "Let's do this together." No, he launched forward, full speed, pride in his stride, his ego outpacing his empathy, yet again. That's the part that stings. Not just that he ran ahead, but that he did it without even offering her the option of partnership. As if it never occurred to him, as if she didn't matter in the context of this moment at all. It wasn't ambition. It wasn't about exercise. It was something more unsettling, a complete emotional disconnect. Like he was living one narrative while she was living another, separated by miles despite standing on the same pavement. And then something shifted. Something small, but deeply human. Sean noticed her. Noticed the space next to her was empty. Noticed what Kody hadn't bothered to see. That she was alone, and not just in the run. The glance he gave her wasn't overdone. He didn't grandstand. He simply stepped in. Said more with his presence than Kody had said in months. And in that brief moment, Janelle smiled. A real smile. A relieved smile. The kind you give when someone shows up. Not because it's expected, but because it's kind. Think about how few people in her life have done that. Stepped in when it wasn't convenient. Shown up without making it about themselves. That tiny moment said everything. A man who was barely in the spotlight saw what the man in the center had missed completely. That this wasn't about pace or performance. It was about standing beside someone, even when they're struggling just to start. The contrast hit hard. One man sprinting alone, the other adjusting his steps to match hers. And the irony? Kody probably saw himself as the star that day. Probably thought he was inspiring her with his lead, setting the tone, showing strength. But all he showed was emptiness. And the worst kind. The kind that smirks after leaving someone behind. Janelle didn't cry that day. She didn't complain. But silence once again told the deeper truth. You could feel it in the way she carried herself through every mile, not needing to be the fastest or the best, just needing not to be invisible. And Robin? Nowhere in sight, physically or emotionally. as usual. That's the thing. Support in a plural family isn't just about big talks and check-ins. It's the little things. The attention, the effort, the choices. You don't have to scream at someone to break them. Sometimes all it takes is your absence, from the moments they need you most. So when Sean extended that simple gesture, it held far more weight than anyone watching from home could ignore. In fact, you could argue it was the most honest moment in that entire event. No pretense, no camera performance, just a man seeing hurt and stepping beside it. Meanwhile, Kody ran past real connection like it wasn't even worth slowing down for. That was the difference. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Because if Kody couldn't walk beside her when things were light, a small race, a sunny day, a simple ask, what hope was there for the harder seasons? The moments behind closed doors? The marriage that was already hanging by threads? He showed us exactly what kind of partner he is when no one's asking him to be one. That's when it matters most. And Janelle? She walked that finish line quietly. But she finished something bigger than a race that day. She finished believing he'd ever truly show up for her. In any way that counts. He wasn't beside her. He was playing to an audience that only existed in his mind. And the 5K run, the one moment that could have been quiet, connective, low pressure, it turned into another spectacle with Kody at the center. Again, sprinting ahead, shirt tight, ego tighter, one arm raised like he'd conquered the track. But look closer and you realize this wasn't a break from his usual behavior. It was the blueprint. He's done this exact dance for years. Kody doesn't know how to be still. He doesn't know how to sit in vulnerability without controlling the narrative. And when the spotlight isn't on him, he creates one. It's how he's always masked the emotional gap between him and his wives. He performs. He flexes. He takes up space until there's no room left for anyone else to simply feel. We've seen it at family meetings, at counseling sessions, even at the breaking points of marriages. It's the same rhythm. He talks fast, adds a weird joke, throws in intensity, then shifts blame the moment someone calls out his distance. He doesn't partner, he presents. And the 5K was no different. This is why fans weren't surprised. Heartbroken, yes, but not surprised, because what happened on that track wasn't new. It was familiar, like every birthday forgotten, like every half apology disguised as a complaint, like every "I tried" that really meant I didn't want to try unless it benefited me. There's nothing wrong with competing. There's nothing wrong with personal pride or goals. But when you're married, when you've made a commitment to be with someone, you don't win if you cross the finish line alone while they're still searching for footing. That's not triumph. That's abandonment covered in sweat and denial. And what's worse, he seemed proud of it. Pride dripped from his posture that day. That "I still got it" look. Like anyone was timing him. Like the viewers at home weren't watching Janelle's face instead. They were. We saw who was hurting. And we've seen it before. Think back. Think about how he responded to Christine when she gently, over seasons, tried to explain what wasn't working. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't accusing. She was barely holding on. And his response? Defensiveness. Smirks. Saying her needs were too much, too emotional, too dramatic. And yet, when he finally admitted she was leaving, he called it betrayal. Because in his mind, closeness has always meant control. With Janelle, it was a quieter devastation. She didn't yell. She didn't storm out. She slowly detached. And he didn't even notice until it was too late. Or maybe he did, but his image mattered more than her emotional well-being. That's the part that cuts deep. Because there are men like this in real life. Everywhere. Men who show up for the public moments with props and platitudes, but disappear when it requires presence, vulnerability, real listening. They don't know how to handle intimacy that isn't sparkly or staged, and when their partners need them most, they vanish behind performance. It's not that they don't care. It's that they don't know how to care beyond offering surface-level support, if you can call it that. That's what so many viewers felt watching this scene. That same ache, that recognition. They knew what it looked like to be walked ahead of, praised in public but neglected in private. To be told you're strong so someone can avoid offering actual strength. Kody uses that language a lot, you'll notice. Praise wrapped in dismissal. You're independent. You don't need much from me. Translation, don't expect me to show up. And let's talk about the dancing. Yes, the dancing. The flailing limbs, the exaggerated movements, the chaotic energy he calls joy. That too is performance. He doesn't dance with people. He dances at them. He turns joy into a one-man show. And it looks a lot like how he moves through life. Loud, distracted, oblivious to how uncomfortable his partner looks just trying to match his rhythm. This all connects, because real partnership requires adjustment. It requires tone down, speed match, eye contact, check-in. And he doesn't do any of that, ever. He expects everyone to mold to his speed, his emotion, his version of reality. Never the reverse. He leads, even when no one's following. And when they don't follow, he says they abandoned him. But here's the truth the 5K exposed. He's had the emotional finish line all to himself for years. Half the wives quit the race entirely, and the one who remained beside him, unbothered until now, even Janelle is out of breath, and not from the running. What we're seeing isn't a fall from grace. It's the inevitable outcome of years spent running further and further from emotional accountability. He didn't lose a wife in that race. He proved he never knew how to keep one. It's not always what's said. Sometimes it's the way someone stands, how slowly a conversation dies when they walk into the room. It's the shift in energy when silence seems safer than honesty. And if you've watched long enough, really watched, you know that's the look that follows Kody around every shared space. The 5K wasn't loud. Not the way you'd expect reality TV to be. There was no screaming match, no camera-chasing explosion. But my God, the weight of what wasn't said, it filled the scene like thick smoke. You can feel it the moment Janelle is left standing at the starting line. She doesn't cry. She doesn't call out after him. She just stares ahead with this quiet, practice resilience. The kind of stillness that tells you this isn't new. She's been in this emotional vacuum for years. All the run did was make it visible. Cameras cut between shots. Kody bouncing forward, full of animated energy, smiling to no one in particular, and Janelle, steady, solemn, swallowed by the backdrop. One looks like he's starring in his own show. The other looks like she forgot what role she was cast in. And that contrast? It was jarring. Viewers picked up on it instantly. Everyone watching knew, without dialogue, without sound bites, that something was deeply wrong. It wasn't even about running. This could have been any scene anywhere. It's the pattern that repeats. Kody shows up loud and large, and everything else in the room mutates around him. The air gets heavy. The women get smaller. Their words get careful. Reactions become calculated. Not for drama, but for survival. You don't survive in a relationship like that by confronting power directly. You survive it by staying quiet, by masking disappointment with polite laughter, by nodding at things you stopped agreeing with years ago. You smile through hurt, because anything else turns into a lecture, or worse, a guilt trip wrapped in spiritual jargon about unity and loyalty. Christine figured this out a long time ago. Pull up that footage from some of the final couch interviews before she moved out. You'll see it if you really pay attention. When he speaks, she turns her body slightly away. Not outright defiance, but an angled shield. She avoids eye contact when he makes one of his infamous overreaching explanations. And her face? Always on the edge of holding back something bigger, something sharper. But the cameras aren't the problem. It's what she knows happens when the cameras stop. There's one moment the fans still remember, clear as day. Season 17, just before Christine left. Kody claimed he was blindsided, that she never communicated her unhappiness. But in scene after scene, you can see how checked out he was. Arms folded, jaw tight, eyes darting, like he's rehearsing responses instead of hearing her. He wasn't just unresponsive, he was unreachable. And when Janelle speaks in confessionals today, there's no rage in her voice, no seething blame. Just this calm flatness. And that's what feels dangerous. Because that's when you know she's tired. Not upset, just done. This version of her doesn't want to fix things anymore. She wants peace more than she wants answers. And when someone gets to that point, there's no coming back. Which brings us back to what the cameras didn't show during the 5K. Not because they weren't rolling, but because emotional distance doesn't always have a soundtrack. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand a flashback montage. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman at a starting line, looking straight ahead while the man who promised to protect her disappears down the track. That's the part that so many women watching recognized. It wasn't about exercise. It was the symbolism, the emotional labor, years of waiting for someone to notice your effort, to walk at your pace, to see you, really see you, not as a problem or an asset, but as a person with limits, with exhaustion, with value. It's subtle, but devastating once you catch it. The way Kody rarely asks questions, the way he interrupts, the way he gets loud when he's challenged, but fragile when criticized. The expectation isn't just that the wives fall in line, it's that they read his mind, absorb his moods, dance quietly around his discomfort. And when they finally stop doing that, he says they've changed, that they've been influenced, that they turned against the unity of the family. But it was never unity. It was silence. And once that silence breaks, even a little, in the way Christine closed her door, in the way Janelle slowed down instead of speeding up just to match him, he panics. Because control dressed up as connection only works when everyone plays along. And for the first time, they're not playing. So no, the 5K didn't explode with drama. It revealed something scarier. Quiet disconnection, betrayal through neglect, and the echo of too many years where no one felt safe enough to speak first. Viewers didn't need a narrator. They felt it. And that feeling doesn't fade easy. Because it doesn't belong to the show. It belongs to every person who's ever been overlooked by someone who promised never to walk ahead without them. He said, "I forgive you." Just like that. No context, no follow-up, no reason. And Gabe, his own son, who hadn't heard from his father in months, maybe longer, was supposed to what? Fall into his arms? Say thank you? Beg for a relationship again? No. Instead, Gabe did exactly what thousands of viewers watching at home would have done. He paused. He blinked. And he asked, "Forgive me for what?" That one line. It hit like a truck. Because when a parent says something like that, out of the blue, with no accountability behind it, and no healing effort to back it up, it's not a reconciliation. It's control. It's ego dressed as humility. It's trying to skip the hard work, the apologies, the explanations, the repair, and still collect credit for trying. That moment between Gabe and his father echoed through screens like a siren. Because everyone who's ever had a parent throw a guilt text, a vague phone call, or an obligation-laced holiday invite, they felt that. When someone who's hurt you reaches out not to say they're sorry, but to make you appease them while still pretending they're the victim, that's not love. That's performance. Kody didn't just fail to fix his relationship with Gabe, he made it worse. Because his version of reaching out isn't to connect. It's to check a box. So later, in a therapy chair or confessional clip, he can say, "But I tried." But trying isn't a text that says "call me" thrown into the abyss after silence. Trying isn't waiting for your child to act like you left the door open. Trying is effort, consistency, risk, listening, and most of all, honesty about what went wrong. But Kody doesn't do that. Not with Gabe, not with Garrison, and definitely not with Leon. His pattern is always the same. Emotionally disappear, then reappear just long enough to claim he wasn't the one who disappeared in the first place. The dynamic with Gabe was different than the ones he had with his other kids, because Gabe started to question him, not just around COVID rules, which was the surface-level fight, but around things that cut deeper. Loyalty, respect, consistency. And when Gabe stopped nodding along, when he started asking hard questions, Kody didn't rise to meet that reflection. He shut down. And then he blamed it on disrespect. That's the pattern. Kody wants respect without earning it, wants loyalty without showing up, wants forgiveness without owning damage. And Gabe? Gabe was one of the first kids to draw that hard line. And then there's Garrison. He wasn't looking for a relationship anymore. He was surviving the damage left behind. Quiet, independent, building his life far away from the emotional wreckage his father wasn't willing to clean up. Garrison did what so many kids do after years watching emotional manipulation cloaked in faith and fatherhood. He pulled back. For his safety, for his dignity. But the blow for viewers came later, after Garrison was gone. And the rumors began to swirl. That Gabe, not Kody, was the one police contacted first. That Kody allegedly refused to go at first. That he wouldn't even check. Even if we stay committed to only the facts shown on the show, we know this. When Garrison spoke, when Gabe cried, and when the walls were cracking, Kody still stood at the center, arms folded, waiting for everyone else to fall back in line. Viewers weren't just watching a father struggle with kids growing up. They were watching a man unravel because he couldn't control the grown-ups his children had become. Kids who didn't fall under the same patterns the wives did. Kids who could say no. Who weren't afraid of the spiritual guilt trip. Who knew the difference between a father and a performer. And Gabe, more than any other child in that family, became a mirror. Not just for Kody's inability to connect, but for the deep, raw ache that so many people recognize in their own lives. Viewers were shaken by how calm Gabe remained as he recounted that story. He wasn't angry, just tired, confused. Still, somewhere in there, hoping the relationship was real, and finally realizing it wasn't. We watched his face break down mid-interview. Tears caught in his voice when he tried to describe what it felt like getting that message. Not a call during a hard time, not a text that said, "How are you?" Not a moment of returning with intent to fix the loss. Just, "I forgive you." Which begs the question again. Forgive him for what? For being disappointed? For calling out broken promises? For refusing to drink the Kool-Aid of family unity while the reality was separation? Kody's version of parenting seems to rely on silence from the other side, because as long as the child doesn't challenge him, he can pretend everything's fine. But challenge him even once, and you'll find yourself locked out of more than just a conversation. You'll be written out of the story altogether. He wears victimhood like armor now. The bitter irony? He's rejected the role of father so many times, but still demands the title. And the ones paying for it aren't him. It's the kids. The ones who stood by waiting. For years. Then stopped. And when they did, he cried abandonment. But abandonment isn't silence. It's what came before that. The endless days of no contact. The birthdays missed. The memories not made. And worst of all, the forgiveness never meant to heal, only to clear his own conscience. Because Kody doesn't reach out to reconnect. He reaches out to rewrite. There are moments in life where the silence says more than anything ever spoken. Moments that don't announce themselves with drama, but hang in the air like a frozen breath, waiting for someone to do the right thing. The night Garrison passed was one of those moments. And what aches the most isn't just the loss itself, it's everything that led up to it. The miles of emotional distance, the half-hearted texts, the empty seats at celebrations, the ones who should have shown up but didn't. And according to the reports circulating after his death, when police tried to find someone, to get someone to come, to care, to witness, Kody allegedly refused. No one needs to speculate to feel the gravity in that. Whether the report is completely accurate or not, the very fact that it sounds like something he'd do tells you everything you need to know about how far he's drifted from the role he once claimed with pride. Father. You go back through the older seasons, the earlier footage, and you start to see it. Not all at once, but in pieces. In the way Kody slowly started stepping back from the adult children, the moment they stopped playing along or towing a certain emotional line. The way he called any disagreement disrespect. The way even questioning him became an offense that needed correcting. And Garrison? He was one of the first to push back hard. When the COVID restrictions happened, when the family was splintering harder than ever before, Garrison called him out. Not with cruelty, not with hatred, but with truth. He pointed out the hypocrisy, the double standards, the fact that one side of the family, Robin's side, was getting full access and affection, while everyone else had to settle for crumbs and protocol. And Kody hated that. Not because it was untrue, but because Garrison refused to pretend anymore. So when the grief hit, when the tragedy happened, when that final, irreversible loss took place, what remained was that chasm, that ache so many of Kody's children have spoken about in interviews, or in glimpses caught off camera. The sense that when it really mattered, he didn't come. Can you imagine being Gabe? Already shattered, already numb, and then having to be the one police contacted instead? Still reeling, still breathing through pain that doesn't even have language, and now he's the one holding the emotional weight and the logistics. And the person whose presence could have offered even an ounce of grounding, his father, allegedly wouldn't come. That part broke something in the fan base. You could feel it. Threads overnight filled with disbelief, then anger, then deep, quiet empathy. Not for Kody, for the kids, because even those who had given Kody the benefit of the doubt until now couldn't justify this. Not even close. And Kody, when he eventually did speak on Garrison's death, the words were filtered through tears. But the core of the message remained the same subtle deflection. He was hurt. He was rejected. He tried. Did he ever say what efforts he'd made? Did he outline the weeks, the months where he'd shown up, called, reached out, without it turning into a lecture or a demand or a guilt trip? No, because he likely knew he hadn't. This isn't about whether he's crying now. Of course he's grieving, but there's a difference between grief and regret. One is clean, the other clings to you. And you could see it, even in the pauses between his words. This wasn't the grief of a father who lost his child in spite of everything. This was the slow-motion realization that he might have helped push this distance further than anyone realized. The hardest pill to swallow? It didn't happen overnight. The fracture was years in the making. Every time Garrison tried to connect and was dismissed. Every time he asked for equality in the family and was told he was being combative. Every ignored message. Every missed opportunity to say, I see you. You're mine. Your anger. Your hurt. They matter. And the night of his death? Nothing. Even if the police report turns out to be incomplete. Even if some elements were misunderstood. The truth remains unchanged. His absence had become normal long before that tragic moment. His outstretched hands came too late for the son who'd stopped trying to hold them. Nobody demands perfect parenting. But showing up? That was the bare minimum. And now, it's the echo that can't be taken back. This isn't about pointing fingers anymore. This is about the legacy being left behind. The gaping space where a father should have stood. The missed calls, the avoided visits, the quiet, complicated truth that love without action means nothing. And when you're the one who's missing in the most critical moment of your child's life, sometimes forgiveness never makes it to the finish line. I forgive you. That phrase keeps echoing, like it's supposed to mean something, like it carries healing or opens doors. But when it comes from someone who refuses to take real responsibility, when it's said before a real conversation ever happens, it doesn't sound like grace. It sounds like manipulation. For Kody, forgiveness is a shield, not an offering. It's a get-out-of-accountability card. He uses it because it sounds noble, because it plays well in interviews, because he can repeat it in those couch confessionals with glassy eyes and cracked voices, and hope that we forget what came before. But you can't call it forgiveness if there was never an apology. Ever notice that? Kody never says, I'm sorry. Not fully. Not without qualifying it. He dances around the emotion with lines like, I made mistakes, or I was in a tough place. But he rarely stops to say the words that matter most. I hurt you, and it was wrong. It's almost like the word forgiveness is a nail he hammers into place just so he can say, I tried. So the burden of fixing things is no longer his. Now it's the kids who are too cold, too unforgiving, too disconnected. But let's be honest, reaching out isn't about sending a weird cryptic text after years of silence. Reaching out means sitting in discomfort, opening the door, not to prove a point, but to build a bridge. And Kody has never actually done that. Not with Gabe, not with Garrison, not with Leon. He doesn't reach out to connect. He reaches out to declare that he did, so that the next time someone calls him out for being absent, he can point to those awkward, half-hearted gestures and say, "But I reached out." It's the classic checkbox parenting model. One empty birthday call, one vague holiday text, one message weeks too late after a crisis. It's enough to say he did the right thing, but never enough to actually be present. And when his kids don't reply, here's where that twisted loop tightens again. Now it's them who are keeping the distance. Now he's the victim. Now he's the dad who's trying while his children are being unreasonable, holding grudges, poisoned by their mothers. And yet, we've seen what effort looks like. We've seen it in Christine putting herself aside for her kids' surgeries. We've seen it in Janelle prioritizing her children's mental health over Kody's fragile pride. We've even seen it in Meri, showing up long after love left the room. There's no shortage of flawed parenting in this family. But you know what made the difference? Consistency. Presence. Effort driven by love, not performance. Kody's efforts are always loud during filming and deafeningly silent behind the scenes, according to what we've seen through the family's actual words on camera. And the damage it leaves on the kids? You see it plain as day. Gabe's low voice cracking in that interview room. His confusion over being forgiven when he didn't even know what he was being accused of. His exhausted eyes, struggling not to break down, trying to find sense in a sentence that never came with meaning. You want to know what that does to someone? When a parent shows up only to claim they've shown up? When communication becomes weaponized? It breaks trust. Not instantly, but in slow, steady fractures that stretch over years. Children learn fast. They learn to stop expecting, to stop reaching, to stop hoping. Because what's worse than radio silence? False hope wrapped in a guilt trip message. Call me. I forgive you. Do you even want a relationship with me? Texts that act like olive branches, but come with thorns. It's why Leon has publicly said Kody lied about trying to reconnect. It's why other kids have stopped talking to him at all. Not because they don't love him, but because love doesn't survive in manipulation. It dies quietly in confusion. And in those rare moments where Kody tries to claim the role of hurt parent, you can always see it, the way he turns everything back around. He makes pain about himself. Loss becomes abandonment. Criticism becomes persecution. He doesn't reflect. He rewrites. That's what forgiveness means to him. It's not a circle, it's a mirror, a way to hold himself gently while the people he's hurt are still trying to breathe through the damage. And the saddest part? The kids still remember the good parts. Kody was fun once. In earlier seasons, he did show affection. That's what makes the loss complicated. The kids and the audience both grieve not just the man he became, but the man he used to be. But that man doesn't text, "I forgive you." He would have walked through the door, no cameras, no conditions, sat face to face and said, "Tell me everything. I'm here." This version of him, he hits send on a message that checks a box, then wonders why no one replies. It starts with a pause. Janelle sitting back, arms folded tighter than usual, a stiffness in her shoulders that doesn't read like anger. It reads like fear, but not the shouting kind, the kind you wear when you know raising your voice will only escalate him more. The room, her apartment, is small, the kind of space that should feel familiar, intimate, safe. But in that moment, everything shrinks when he stands up. He doesn't explode right away. That's not how it works. It's slower, controlled, almost measured. He rises, looms just a little too close, wrists tight, voice sharpening. Not quite a yell yet, but moving quickly in that direction. He's not just making a point, he's taking the space, physically, mentally, emotionally. Janelle stays frozen, looking up at him. And if you were watching with the volume off, you wouldn't think it was a conversation. You'd think it was an interrogation. At first glance, it looks like a typical marital conflict. Tense, heated, maybe even justified. But if you've ever been in that kind of energy before, you know. You know. This wasn't about COVID. This wasn't about holidays. This was about power, about intimidation, about what happens when someone stops seeing you as a partner and starts needing to win. And when a man starts measuring love by control, the quiet turns into something dangerous. When Kody stood up during that scene, something in Janelle's posture slipped. She didn't flinch, but her arms came in closer to her stomach. Her throat tightened. Her legs shifted just enough to suggest she'd leave if she had somewhere to go. Except she didn't, and he knew it. This wasn't physical violence, but it was still violent, the kind of emotional intimidation that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves wake. Viewers at home, especially those who've been through it, felt the oxygen in the room shift. Hearts dropped. It wasn't the words, though those were bitter and sharp. It was the way he used his voice, his height, his volume, to shut her down instead of listen. What makes this moment worse is that someone else was there. Robin, sitting off to the side with that same helpless expression she always wears. Except this time, she said something. Not to Kody, to Janelle. Just stay. Let's talk. As if Janelle was the issue. As if sitting there quietly with an angry man towering over her was better than walking away. You could see how trained she was to minimize male aggression, to encourage women to stay still instead of challenge. It was painful to watch, not just because it was misguided, but because it was familiar. This is what generations of women have been taught, to stay calm in the face of rage, to manage the man's emotions first. If he's yelling, you must have pushed him. If he's angry, don't escalate. If he stands up, stay down. And if you leave, you're the one abandoning the conversation. Except this wasn't abandonment. Janelle choosing to walk out that day was a survival instinct. Maybe not physical survival, but emotional safety, mental clarity. Her leaving wasn't the failure. It was the resistance. The reaction from viewers was immediate. Reddit threads exploded. TikTok said what TLC didn't. The scene didn't need context, didn't need backstory. What people saw was something too many recognized. A wife pushed past the point of patience. A husband demanding obedience disguised as unity. A room charged not with conflict, but with control. And Kody, in the aftermath, sat there offended, stunned, as if Janelle was the problem, as if her not accepting his rage was some kind of betrayal. It was the same narrative we've seen again and again. When Christine left, he said she wounded the family. When Gabriel cried, he said the boy had a grudge. When Janelle finally stood up, he said she disrespected him. At what point does he stop blaming the reactions and start owning the cause? Because here's the truth. This fight wasn't about logistics. It wasn't about plans. It was about how he views the women in his life. He speaks of leadership, but he leads with dominance. He asks for respect, but shows none. And worst of all, he demands love, but doesn't recognize care unless it comes packaged in silence. There's another layer that makes this moment even more chilling. You could feel Janelle would have never stopped him from standing, wouldn't dare push back physically, wouldn't raise her voice in return. Not because she's weak, but because she's smart. Because she knows exactly how that dynamic shifts the second she tries to match his energy. The bravest thing she did that day wasn't arguing. It was walking away. Because walking away when someone insists you sit and take it is an act of defiance, of clarity, of survival, especially when the world tells you you're supposed to endure it quietly, for the sake of family, for the narrative, for the camera. She chose none of that. She chose herself. That wasn't a fight. It was the final thread snapping under pressure. And if you're still wondering whether the show overplayed it, ask the viewers who paused the episode just to catch their breath. Because once you've seen it, once you've felt that kind of scene, even through a screen, you don't forget it. It doesn't always start with confrontation. Sometimes the betrayal starts with a smile, a side glance, a shift in tone during a couch interview. And sometimes the loudest betrayal is the one that no one names. Not out loud, not directly, but it lingers, in the delays, in the paperwork no one signs, in the icy pauses during meetings that are supposed to mark the end of a chapter. Christine left first, And her exit wasn't a scandal. It was a declaration. She folded up the years of exhaustion, packed her dignity, and walked away with something Kody could never understand: peace. But what came after her departure was even more revealing, because behind every clipped sentence Kody said about her betrayal and every sorrowful nod from Robyn about how they tried to be friends, there was something deeper: strategy. The moment Christine became too popular, too self-assured, too free, the whisper campaign began. It wasn't direct. It never is. But suddenly Kody had stories. Suddenly she had sabotaged his reconciliation with Meri. Suddenly she was the one twisting everything. And Robyn, always softly agreeing, always slightly removed, would nod along without adding anything specific. Because she never has to say much. She lets Kody do the talking, and the damage flows from there. Then there was the property meeting. Coyote Pass. That's when things turned from obvious to personal. Because that plot wasn't just land. It was the final battleground. The legal lines, the division of ownership, the legacy. And every wife had to figure out where they stood. Not just with Kody, but with each other. Christine was already out. Meri was largely silent, but watching. And Janelle? She was at the center, carrying more of the emotional weight than anyone else, trying to be fair, trying to be logical. But fair doesn't work in rooms full of quiet tricks and invisible strings being pulled. Meri hesitated on signing the documents. Some say it was about an NDA, others believe it was about leverage. Maybe fear, maybe a warning from a lawyer. But what's clear is this: her delay cost time, and Kody hates time delays. Not because of the money, because of the control it costs him. When people stall, when they ask questions, he loses grip, and it drives him wild. So suddenly, the story is she's holding up the whole thing. Suddenly it's whispered that Janelle might be negotiating around her, that somehow, behind Meri's back, Janelle and Kody were allegedly working on a deal that excluded her. And if you only listened to confessionals, you might start to believe it. But the footage told a different story. When Janelle and Meri met before that meeting, their body language wasn't tense. Meri smiled, offered a hug. They chatted, casual, friendly. There was no bruised energy, no suspicion. If a betrayal had happened, it hadn't touched that moment. Not yet. So where was the shift? When did the smear begin? Look closer. It always starts with Robyn's silence. She doesn't say the words herself, she lets them hang in the air, lets Kody vent, lets Meri feel abandoned, lets Janelle carry the procedural mess, and Christine stay conveniently out of it. She watches, measures the room, decides what to amplify, what to let die in vague silence. And that's the mask, the hero mask that viewers once believed, the peacemaker, the helper, the woman who just wants the family together. But after years of watching, fans have learned that the quietest one in the room may be wielding the sharpest blade. Not through yelling, but through omissions, through selective tears, through timing. Because if she really wanted to clear the air, she could have. She could have shut down the deal behind Meri's back rumor with one sentence, could have confirmed that Janelle wasn't scheming, that no woman had plotted against another. But she didn't. Instead, she backed out of signing the deal herself. Months passed, heads turned, and the story changed. Suddenly, Meri's the victim again. But not because of Kody. This time, it's Janelle and Christine, the very women who spent years defending her when no one else did, the very women she smiled at just weeks before. Viewers saw this game before. When Christine began rising in public opinion, the sabotage stories came fast. And now, as Janelle grows more defiant, as her interviews shift from hopeful to hardened, she becomes the next target of half-truths and whispers passed behind confessional curtains. But here's the thing about silent smears. They depend on no one watching too closely, no one rewinding the footage, no one noticing the edits. But this fanbase, they're watching. Every breath, every pause, every hint of shade thrown without a name. The manipulation doesn't need to scream. It just needs to linger long enough that when the next blame game starts, it already feels like the truth. That's how the mask slips. Not all at once, but piece by piece. There was a time this whole story felt like it might end differently. Remember that? Back when the family was all still in one house? Back when there were messy dinners, loud routines, toddlers climbing on couches, teens arguing in the kitchen. Back when being overwhelmed by the chaos of plural marriage still felt like something they were proud to show. It was imperfect, but it was full. A crowded photo frame that at least looked like unity. That version of Sister Wives is long gone. What we're watching now, and what has quietly unfolded across the last few seasons, is not a redemption arc. It's a warning. A slow-motion unraveling of what happens when a man refuses to grow, when connection is replaced with control, when loyalty is demanded but never returned. This isn't a family finding its way back to each other. This is a family showing us, in real time, what emotional erosion looks like when the foundation was never equal to begin with. And the viewers? They're no longer confused about what they're seeing. They're awake. The comment sections are full of them now. People who want to root for Kody, who gave him room to mess up like any human might. But those same viewers, they're the ones calling it out now, saying what the show carefully dances around. They see the pattern, the entitlement, the smirks, the tears that show up only when the control slips, not when the damage is done. They've watched what real detachment looks like, and not just between him and the wives, but with his own children. They've marked every missed opportunity, every moment he could have sat down, held space, asked questions like a father or a husband, but chose pride instead. We've seen Christine's strength become misunderstood because it came with boundaries. We've watched Janelle get blamed for giving up when she simply stopped lying to herself. And we've seen Meri, after hanging on longer than anyone would have thought possible, finally let go. Not with fireworks, but the quiet release of someone who's finally finished arguing with ghosts. And Robin, she still sits apart. She still cries, still repeats, "I just didn't expect this." Like every tear isn't timed with her own closeness to the spotlight. She says it's hard to be misunderstood. Meanwhile, fans aren't buying it anymore, because if this family has taught us anything, it's that silence speaks louder than tears. And her silence, in every betrayal, during every manipulation, through every distorted retelling of events, has spoken volumes. So we're left with this. A family that once tried to frame itself as revolutionary, modern, spiritual, now split into factions of heartbreak. The dream that they'd all age together on one giant property crumbled, not because life got in the way, but because no one cared enough to hold it together once it stopped benefiting them. It started as one man with 4 wives and a vision. It ends with one woman remarried, another alone but healing, one stepping away completely, one still clinging to a life no one else wants. And the man at the center? Still confused, still raging, still proclaiming betrayal as if he didn't cut his own family apart with sharpened expectations and silence he pretended was strength. Season 20 won't fix this. We know that now. The fractures aren't temporary. They're permanent markers of who stayed too long, who left too late, who got scapegoated trying to escape, and who watched it all happen without acknowledging the role they played in causing it. What we're watching isn't tragic because they failed to stay together. It's tragic because so much of the pain was preventable. If compassion had been prioritized over control, if listening had replaced shouting, if connection meant more than getting your way. And that scar tissue, it shows. In the kids, in the strained conversations, in the long pauses between questions no one wants to answer during those sit-down interviews. These aren't people processing wounds anymore. They're people living with them, adjusting to them, building lives around them. So no, this won't be neatly resolved. This isn't some story that ends in forgiveness and harmony and a final group hug under an Arizona sunset. This is real-life fallout, long-term disconnection, the raw, often silent aftermath when people mistake position for power and mistake love for loyalty. And maybe, after all this, the question isn't who stayed or who got the better end of the deal. The question is, who survived this family structure? Who walked out of it with their self-worth intact? Who told the truth even when it cost them love? Who stopped pretending? And maybe the final question is for you, the ones watching. When all the dust settles, do you believe this family can ever truly heal? Let me know, because this isn't just a reality show anymore. It's a mirror,